You're listening to Parasearch UK Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to The Spirit Dimension with your host, Kerry Greenaway, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening and welcome to The Spirit Dimension. My name is Kerry Greenaway, and as always on a Sunday evening I like to bring you something a little different. Tonight I'm joined in the studio by the lovely Ashley Mortimer. Good evening, Ashley, how are you?
I'm lovely, Kerry, lovely apparently. Thank you.
You're absolutely adorable.
It's one of those shows, is it, where you're not going to ask me anything difficult and it's all going to be loving and nice?
We shall see. Now, we did a show previously called Black and White Magic, and we sort of wanted to do a part two, but the other person that was supposed to join us tonight, Mr. Ward, has actually gone on the missing list. We don't know where he is, so we're wondering if he's been spirited away by the
Pixies. Pixies have done it.
Pixies have done it. Yeah, they've stolen him away. So we are going to touch on that, and then we're going to move on and have basically a general discussion about this time of year. Now, last time we spoke, we kind of was talking about intention, weren't we? And saying that there is no black or white magic, that it is just neutral, but it's about your intent that goes into it. Behind the power of it is your intention, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with all your actions in life. It's your intent that puts the morality and the ethics onto what you do. So the thing itself that you use, the tool that you use to do it, whether it be your language, words, behaviour or whatever, is somewhat incidental. So, yeah, I think last time I likened magic to a car, and I said that, the way that you drive, it's about your intent as a driver. It's not the car that's good or bad. If you run somebody over because you're being careless, it's not the car's fault. If you take somebody to hospital who's had an accident, it's not the car's credit for doing so, it's you as the driver, and it's your intent that matters.
Exactly, and that's sort of where we got to. But this time of year, it's very dark, isn't it? It's all, the scare factor is well and truly all part of Halloween now, isn't it? It's the dark and the witches and occult and the symbology that surrounds the this time of year, the veils, the whole thing conjures up that darker side of things, doesn't it?
Well, it always was. I mean, I think our ancestors celebrated at this time of year the beginning of winter, because this is truly what Halloween really is, or Samhain as the Celts would have called it. And they celebrated the beginning of winter, and it was that period of the year where, in the darkness, you can't do things. You can't be out in the field so easily. You can't be kind of making a living and making the food. So by now the food stores are all in. They would have slaughtered the animals and salted the meat and done all the necessary stuff to try and get through the winter. And it was a time of fear, because obviously there was a very real fear that you wouldn't make it through the winter. So that's really where some of these traditions and customs come from, is from the times when we were living much more closely with the land. And it would be the time of year where you would you would be frightened. It was a frightening thing, and we can talk about that, and we can talk about where some of these customs come from and why people like to scare themselves, because our ancestors did.
Yeah, it's very much a thing scare factor. That's really basically why a lot of people like to go out paranormal investigating, is because there's that, thrill of being in a dark place in the middle of the night, maybe encountering a spirit. That is really what people do it for, or the ghost hunting community do it for generally.
Well, however you get your kicks, I guess.
Yeah, that's one way we do it. So, okay, where was I going with that thought? So why is it that this time of year we say that the veil is thinning?
Well, I mean, this is a turn of phrase. So there were really, historically, there are two aspects to this season. And the first of which is the one that I said, it's that preparation for the winter. And I'd like to talk about that because I want to explain why, why we scare ourselves and why we have these frightening things. And then the other aspect is that it was a time to look back at our ancestors. There's a Roman god called Janus, who looks both forwards and backwards. Mm-hmm. And it's that threshold. It's one of those liminal times of year where we look back on the summer that's just gone and the winter that's just coming. So we're looking backwards and forwards, and Janus has two faces. He faces forwards into the future and backwards into the past. So we would look back into the past at our own ancestors, or our ancestors look back at their ancestors. And of course, this is a tradition that's quite widespread around the world, these customs of thinking of the dead and the departed at this time of year. And it would be a natural time. The darkness and the dark time is where we, I don't know, it's just a natural cosmic universal law that when in the darkness we think about the things that are not there, or things that don't have that physical reality anymore. What could be out there we can't see into the dark. But when we do look into the dark, the things that we see are the things that we know don't have a physical reality anymore. So there are festivals of the dead all over different parts of the world. And mm-hmm. So the two main traditions are, as I say, getting ready for the winter, and I want to talk about explaining why we try and frighten ourselves and what that's all about. It's a bit of reverse psychology. And then, of course, shall I tell you that bit?
Yeah, go on then.
Well, all right then. So I think that's people like Professor Ronald Hutton and people like that have talked about this in their books, in his book, Stations of the Sun, which talks about the solar festivals of the year. But the beginning of winter is that time where, if we can face our fears, if we can face these things that confront us, by giving them some kind of agency, I suppose, by giving them a form, a reality, by carving a frightening pumpkin mask, we can mock and make fun of the things that frighten us. And that's really where a lot of these customs and traditions come from, by lightening up the ghosties and ghoulies bit, by making it a bit fun and a bit light-hearted. It takes away the fear of the fear of nothing, the fear of emptiness, the fear of what might be out there, what the winter holds for us, death maybe, and all those other things. So by giving it a face and laughing at that face, it helps us to conquer our fear. So it's kind of cod psychology, which, as you probably started to gather from these interviews that we've done, figures quite highly in the way that I operate my life and magic. But that, just because it's kind of basic and simplistic and obvious, it doesn't mean it's wrong, and it doesn't mean it doesn't work. And I think if you found people of other cultures and asked Sioux Indian shaman, to describe how their magic works, it's always a lot more simple than you think. Make things simple.
Yeah, definitely.
So the simple thing is if you're frightened of something, depict it in a comic way and mock it. Yeah, and that way you're kind of mocking your fear.
Well, you laugh. You say you've got to laugh in the face of fear, don't you? Laugh in the face of adversity.
That's right. Pour ice cubes down the back of the shirt of danger. Yes.
And that's one way you conquer it, is by making light, well, not light of it, but not allowing it to rule you. I think is where that goes to, isn't it? Yes.
That's right, because you're in control. It's you that has the power over it, because you are now controlling its form and its shape. You are making it, forcing it to take shape, and giving it, as I say, giving it agency. And that's a really good word. I've been dying to use that word. It sounds so good. I have a friend who's a fellow interested in the occult. He's also a professor of anthropology. And he gave a very, very, very good lecture on African sorcery last summer when he was over here. Must get him on the show. We were planning that, weren't we?
Yes, we was.
Yes, and he talks about agency. He talks about this idea of imbuing objects with agency. And I think that's a great word because it gives them an activeness. It gives them the object itself then takes on the traits and characteristics of the thing it's supposed to be representing. And then by acting upon the object, you can, influence and affect and communicate with the thing that it represents. Particularly if the thing that you're representing is something that doesn't have a physical reality, that doesn't have form and shape. And of course, I mean, one could say that's how most religions go about their religious practices.
Well, yeah, but again, they simplify it down into a story, so they get that message across in a story, and that goes across cultures and across the world as well, doesn't it? So whatever. Culture,
absolutely.
It's all done through a story. Yeah.
Oh yes, because you can then. I mean, once it's basic human stuff, isn't it? Once you've got a character, you can then tell a story about them. Are you all right there? Coffee?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, I'm a little slow tonight, shall we say?
You're a little hoarse.
I'm a little hoarse and a little.
Are you?
Little slow.
The brain, pony, yeah.
The brain isn't quite with me at the moment. So we have several traditions that surround Halloween at this time of year, and you mentioned the carving of the pumpkins. It never used to be a pumpkin, did it? It used to be a turnip.
Turnip, yep. Turnip lanterns, jack-o'-lanterns, Halloween lanterns. Yep, that's right.
And it was originally an Irish custom, wasn't it? That then got took over to America when they had the immigration going over to America with the Irish, and they found pumpkins were in more supply than turnips, and that's how come it's a pumpkin, right?
I think that's correct, yes. And of course our American cousins have all kinds of weird names for their I always get confused with all those things that they have. Where they have I can't remember what it is, but what we'd call a cucumber, they call something else, don't they? And it all gets very confusing. But yes, you're basically right. It used to be turnips over here, and pumpkins are more prominent in the United States. I mean, it's true that the US have. Well, I'm going to say this word, and I mean it deliberately to sound ironic, but since they became civilized, a couple of hundred years ago, then they've really embraced lots of things. Anger, violence, warfare, and stupid presidents, amongst other things. But Halloween is a really major festival in America. It's a really big thing. It's a really big deal. I mean, obviously, it's been heavily commercialized,
of course.
But they're crazy about the American people are very crazy about Halloween. You can find all these things on Facebook, and look at these mad things that people have done to their houses. And
yeah,
I know.
Bigger than Christmas, isn't it? Yeah, I was going to say it's bigger than Christmas, but it's starting to get a hold in the UK as well. When you start seeing some of the ways people decorate their houses now. I mean, down my road, if you put a pumpkin out, that's good enough signal to go the trick-or-treating thing. But I have an estate, and they literally go bonkers on it. It's like walking down an American street where it's like completely done up. It's fantastic. To be fair, the effort people go into it, I love it.
I know what you mean. I do. I agree. I sort of agree. I think though I'm a bit sceptical that things are driven by commercialism, and I think people are quite gullible. But I think it's wrong not to be excited about stuff. God, we've gone all philosophical. Listen, hark at this.
I know.
But yeah, I think being passionate and excited about things, even if they are driven by that commercialism that's behind them, is better than a nation of sour faces that don't talk to each other and aren't excited about anything.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think it helps to bring people out into the community together and get to know people, even if it is like at certain times of the year. But it helps bring those traditions forward.
Even if it is knocking on your door and saying,
give me some sweets. Yeah, I want the sweets. Thank you very much.
Extortion, basically.
See you next year.
Exactly.
Or not if the kids get too old for it. But
community engagement, because then of course you get the joy and delight of calling the glazier to come and mend the broken windows and all those other things that happen if you.
Or the window cleaner to wash the eggs off.
Yeah, the window cleaner to scrape the eggs off, and you're right. So really, it's a community service, isn't
it? But it also helps to keep those traditions, and people will then go, so why do we do this? I mean, I have to say, this year, my kids are now a lot older, they're 14 and 11. They're starting to want to know what's behind, why do we do pumpkins, Mum? We do it every year, but why do we do it? And so
clearly you've gone and researched that, which is how you know they came from Ireland, and
exactly.
got me off the hook of trying to describe that to you. Well done.
Now, there was a folklore story that came from behind this as well. Again, it's Irish. And it was from the 1700s, believe it or not.
So that would be potato famine time and emigration time, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And the guy's name, I love this name, it's Stingy Jack.
Stingy Jack. Oh.
Which sort of, he must have been very bad. Do you know what I mean? Old Stingy Jack, for him to get that name right. Well, apparently he made a deal with the devil. I love deals with the devil. They do. They pop up all over the place, deals with the devil. And basically, his deal with the devil was to forget all of his misdemeanours that he's done, right? So he wasn't going to be called Stingy Jack anymore. But when Jack actually tried to enter heaven, he found that his way was was barred. So he went to have a word with the old devil and say, "Oi, mate, we made a deal. I'm supposed to be in heaven now, and he won't let me in." And the devil said, "Well, yeah, I've done what you asked me to do, but that didn't change what you did. It just made everyone forget. So you haven't got anything good and you haven't got anything bad. Everyone's just forgotten everything you've done." So he didn't get into heaven, and he wasn't admitted to hell either, because everyone had forgotten he'd done some really bad things.
Where did he go? Maybe that's where Steve is.
So maybe. Ooh. So, we better not say that, because...
No, we don't want any liability. Yeah,
no, we don't. And basically, he ended up not having anywhere to go. So he ended up wandering the earth as a lost spirit. But the devil gave him an ember from hell to help light his way while he wandered in this nether region. And this is why you do a lantern, a jack-o'-lantern. It's how it got its name, is to help guide you on your way while you're trick or treating.
Now, that's a big theme in human narratives, is the idea that light, particularly lanterns, are there to illuminate the way. And I refer my learned friend to the tarot card, the Hermit, who carries a lantern which lights the way.
Exactly.
And it's the same psychological principle, same archetype, in fact, is exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Exactly where I was going with that thought pattern, because that shows you the way through the darkness of a dark time where you've gone into yourself, you don't know what you're doing or what direction you're taking, but the light will always show you the way. And that is purely embodied in the Hermit tarot card, exactly what you said. Now, if you place it on your doorstep, the jack-o'-lantern, it wards off the evil spirits.
How does it do that then?
I don't know. Maybe they're scared of the light.
Well, you see, that's that thing about light and dark, because the light gets into those bits of the darkness that it ends the darkness. It diminishes it. It ruins it. The darkness has no power or grip when the light illuminates it. Even if there's nothing in the darkness to be frightened of, the fear itself, and that's so often how we behave in our lives as well. It's what we're frightened of happening that prevents us from stepping out of our comfort zone and our shell and taking an initiative and doing things. And it's quite often it's not the likelihood of what happens, it's our fear of that happening that stops us and hurts us. And fear freezes us in a moment. It traps us in time. And these are witchy things. These are things that we need to step outside of. And of course that does take us back to the Halloween principle of personifying and depicting what it is that you're frightened of, and then not being frightened of it. If you're not frightened of the thing through its agency and its connection to the thing it represents, then you're not frightened of that by definition as well.
That's it. I mean, the other thing is, I think we rely so much on our sense of sight. We get so reliant on what we can see with our eyes, even though that's physiologically it's not the most reliable tool. In all honesty, but we get so reliant on it that when we get that sight taken away from us by putting us in a dark situation, it automatically throws us into a fright situation, because we're not used to relying on our other senses. Blind people don't have this issue because they haven't got that anyway, so they rely on their other senses a lot more. But if you're so reliant on your eyesight and that's taken away from you, it automatically puts you in a fearful situation. It throws you, because you can't switch that quickly over into relying on your other senses, and everything becomes heightened, doesn't it? So every little scratch or stone throw, or everything becomes really heightened, and it increases that fear factor as well, doesn't it? And freezes you almost into non-action.
Now, for me, that's a magical principle there, because it's that you've then associated things. It's your own perception that's working. That's much more powerful than the actual thing that's there. You know, you're looking out into the darkness, and you're imagining something not nice awaiting you, some horrible thing in the dark there, and actually, it's your own imagination that's operating on you. It's not the darkness might be hiding nothing. And this is where the lamp of illumination comes in, because to illuminate that darkness, it shows you. But, you know, it's all seeing then, isn't it? As you say, it's not the other senses. But actually, our sight and our vision, by being obscured, kicks off not our other senses, but it kicks off our imagination.
It certainly
again,
does.
You know, I would say maybe that you can look at that and say, well, if you're trying to be a magical person, then, you know, sit in the dark.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. But that's a lot of rituals are done by candlelight, because it becomes your point of focus, doesn't it? It takes away. You sit in the dark and you light candles to illuminate your working. You know, to give that power of fire. It gives it that extra kick. But generally, you start off in a dark situation because you're getting yourself ready for that ritual.
It's an occult technique that that ceremonial magicians would be very familiar with. That if you can stop the mind, if you can still the mind, and there's various build-up methods for that. Yoga's very good. The yoga techniques of pranayama and breath control, and then stilling the breathing, stilling the heartbeat, and then eventually stilling that chattering mind, that little voice that's chattering away to you in the mind at the back. Once you can get to that place of complete silence and complete isolation, then you can come back and concentrate on just one thing. And a candle flame is something that's, as you're probably aware, that a lot of meditation books will tell you to meditate on a candle flame, because it is a single point of something that you can really go into with your concentration and your consciousness and your focus. And of course, if you train the mind and train your what other faculties, well, we're calling it the mind, but it could be the other magical faculties of the human being. If you train that really hard, that single point of consciousness and focus, you can push your consciousness into it. And of course, push your conscious into fire and light. Well, you can expect good results.
Well, yes, you can. Now, we talked a little bit about trick-or-treating, didn't we? And people dressing up. And these days, it's very, like we said before, it's very commercially driven. So it'll be like the latest horror movie character, or, a scary...
Yes, I was out and about last night, and Halloween costumes have changed, and they've got very much more sophisticated. And I saw a lot of people in orange boiler suits with sort of zombie extermination team written on the back. People who were carrying, it used to be, put a black cape on and a bit of white makeup, do a bit of the old Dracula, and perhaps carry a plastic scythe. And now there are people walking around with machetes and hockey masks, and they look like and it's, the city. I was out in town last night in Nottingham, and the city was delightfully terrifying. It always is, to be honest.
It is, yeah, that's on a normal night.
Oh, you've been to Nottingham? No, you haven't.
I passed through it. That's all I'm going to say. No, I went to Newstead Abbey. That's up in Nottingham. Oh,
that's not very far away from here. Yeah, Newstead's... there's some spooky stuff up there, isn't there?
I loved it there. Anyway, that's a different show. Now, this is a tradition that dates back to the Middle Ages. Right, so we're still going quite far back on this one. And basically, with the belief system that spirits were walking the earth on this particular night, that you dressed up to make them think that you were one of them. So they didn't take you away, basically.
Yep, that's right. It's like The Walking Dead. It's covering yourself in zombie blood, and and then the zombies can't tell that you're not one of them. It's like it's like the witches who are amongst us in our society. This is how we are. I'm a prime example of that, disguised as a normal, upstanding citizen, and it's the hidden in plain sight, I think, is the way of looking at it. So yeah, you're right. That's exactly it. Entering the spirit world as a spirit. Yeah, that's.
And the trick-or-treating bit, where you go knocking around, used to be a form of begging.
Yes, of course.
And you used to have to sing a song, a little bit like carol singing. I kind of get this vibe with this one. Is whether you, for your treat, if you gave somebody a treat, And it wouldn't be sweets. It would be something like bread or apples or, something more useful.
I think I might know where you're going with this. Yeah.
We're going to get onto that in a second. And then you'd have a treat song. So you'd get a little song if you gave them something. And if you didn't, then you'd have a minor trick, which basically wasn't like these days. It's like egg or toilet rolls thrown at your house and trees, isn't it? But back then it used to be like one of the implements, one of your farm implements would be hidden or something like that. So it wasn't quite so sinister as it used to be today, because you've got to remember that back in the Middle Ages, tools were very important for living and working. We didn't have.
Oh no, I mean that would be.
Didn't have the frivolous stuff that we have these days.
Yeah, let's not trivialise that, because if you're I don't know, especially at that time of year, if you're gathering in your harvest and you lose your sickle, then you're a bit screwed, aren't you?
Yeah. That's it.
But they were just... I'm not just, we're not just talking about, that's a bit of a pain, I can't do my work today. That's kind of, the winter stores don't work, and it's a real mess. So that's a symbolic act to hide someone's tool.
Exactly. It's, we go, we then used to hide a tool. But that back in the Middle Ages, that would have been a big deal.
Excuse me.
Right, we mentioned apples there. Yes. Now, apples themselves, now they have a huge, huge symbology. And apple bobbing. We do apple bobbing.
We do.
And basically, you float apples in a barrel. There is a technique to this. I know the technique to this, by the way.
Is that to have someone hold your head under the water for you and shove your face down?
No. What you do, right, this is the technique, is like when you go to put your... Because, because they float, you put your mouth over it, it sinks, right?
Yes.
So if you blow out whilst grabbing the apple with your teeth, it doesn't sink, believe it or not.
Okay.
So you sort of have to go like a harumph, kind of blow out whilst you're grabbing your apple, and you can apple bob, you can whip them out in no time.
I can kind of imagine that, yeah.
That is, by the way.
Beg pardon?
The apples, that is.
Your mind has gone somewhere where mine was about 2 minutes ago.
Anyway, moving on.
That cackle. Moving on, that's a great cackle.
It's my Halloween
anyway, go on,
cackle.
you were explaining, yes.
So that's apple bobbing. Now, the old tradition for this one...
hang on. Obviously, I've got to get my little piece in about apples, of course. Because if you cut an apple in half, you know what shape you get when you look at the pips, don't you?
Uh-huh.
Cut it sideways. Cut it down vertically. Cut it horizontally, and you can see the pentagram.
That's right. We learnt that from Steve on the last show we did.
We did.
What show was that? That was the Fool's Journey.
It was indeed, yes.
When we talked about the Fool's Journey at Easter, we learnt about that. And it's called the Flower of Venus, isn't it? Because the way you cut it, it's the flower of life, and the journey of how Venus moves around the planet. It looks like a pentagram, and that's where it comes from. But
it does.
Apples itself have a huge symbology throughout all cultures regarding fertility. So once you've actually bobbed your apple, you're supposed to peel it, but you have to do it in one long strip, as it were, when you peel it.
I'm sorry, every phrase that you're uttering is laced with awful euphemisms for me.
It's not, I know, it's not supposed to be.
It sounds like you're doing it on purpose, Kat.
Honestly, I'm not. But if you're ever trying to peel an apple in one strip, then it's not easy, trust me. And then you're supposed to throw it over your left shoulder, left shoulder, and it's supposed to resemble, the letter is supposed to resemble the initial of the person you're going to marry. So it's almost like a form of divination with apple peel.
Right, yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think what the apple peel would look like. It'd be... I'd probably be marrying someone foreign in a language that's not the Roman alphabet.
I have to say, knowing my luck, I'd be like, what the hell is that supposed to be?
It's sort of hieroglyphics or something, it'd be kind of strange bird standing on top of a sword with a squiggle underneath.
I'd be like, yeah, that don't make no sense.
Maybe we're going to marry a Rorschach inkblot test or something.
That sounds about right. No. Felt like that while I was married. Anyway.
I'd like you to look at this picture, Mr. Mortimer. What do you see? Well, I see a Rorschach inkblot test. Do you not see a beautiful flower or a woman stabbed in a pool of blood? Well, no, if I told you that, then you'd arrest me. So, no, I see a Rorschach ink blot test. They got me anyway, but not to worry.
Now, there are some really... I couldn't find the verified sources of this. So, some say it links back to the Roman festival of Pomona. Pomona,
yep.
Yeah, she was a goddess of fruitfulness, fertility and romance. But
Aren't they all?
Oh, aren't they all? But like you say, it was unverified, so who knows? It was just an idea. And some say it goes back to pre-Christian Ireland, which, to be fair, kind of makes sense. I mean, apples are really like... this whole festival is very Irish Celts, isn't it?
You've got a thing about Ireland tonight, but, I'm just going to say what... Don't worry, I'm just going to say what came into my head there, but don't worry before I say it. So, interesting how there's a sudden... you keep saying Ireland. As soon as you said Ireland that time, pre-Christian Ireland, all I could think about was St. Patrick driving the snakes out. And of course we've got a weird conversation where just so happens by chance we've got snakes and apples. And that's a story we've heard of before, isn't it?
It is, and if you go back far enough, it brings in Lilith, doesn't it?
Of course.
And Lilith, oh gosh, this one's quite hard to explain really, but to do with the symbology between Adam, Eve and Lilith. Lilith is from the subconscious, isn't she? Or represents the subconscious. Eve represents the physical, the reality. And Lilith, isn't the backbone. It's supposed to be where the Kundalini rises and that goes into a snake, and then she appeared as a snake in the Garden of Eden to convince Eve to take the apple, which then, obviously, as we all know, she did, and she got thrown out of the Garden of Eden.
Well, that you've got to... really, we so need Steve on this show, because he would then bring the Kabbalistic interpretation of some of that to bear.
Yeah.
And the Kabbalists, which is... Kabbalah is largely based on Hebrew... hidden occult Hebrew wisdom. There's not really much evidence of people writing about and thinking about Kabbalah very much before about the 12th or 13th century. But it supposedly goes back to pre-biblical times, and supposedly there are mysteries and secret codes hidden in the Old Testament documents and in older Hebrew documents. And these Kabbalists came up, and they have this conception of something called the Tree of Life. Now, that's even later Kabbalistic concept, but that's concerned very much indeed with the fall of man, and it's to do with the journey of God's consciousness interestingly, from the darkness in which there is nothing into the place where there is limitless light, which eventually then descends through these 10 spheres on the schematic called the Tree of Life. Tree of Life, interesting, eh? And God's consciousness descends through the varying levels and spheres of consciousness until he creates the world, basically, until physical reality is incurred in the bottom of the tree. And then the rest of the story of the Tree of Life and Kabbalah and the study of it and the point to it is that mankind now needs to return through these spheres of consciousness in order to reconnect himself with God. So you can lay out the Tree of Life and look at Adam Kadmon on there and this whole thing. But if you study Kabbalah, even just cursory, look at the basic Kabbalah book, you'll start to see how God's consciousness descending causes the fall, what they call the fall, which of course the fall of man is in fact eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And there you go. So you've got all this symbology there, all in Hebrew and biblical stuff. And of course this story is massively interesting. And if you study Kabbalah later, you get to the bit where you can look at the way these spheres are connected on the diagram and discover that there are 22 paths, as Steve would tell you, and each of them have various correspondences, one set of correspondences being the tarot cards. So you can pick out on the tarot around about the fall bit, and I'll let somebody else figure it out for themselves because that's part of the deal. But, you can kind of work out which tarot cards are relevant to the fall of Eden, and therefore you can start trying to pick out which paths and spheres might possibly represent Adam, Lilith and Eve, and the whole story of that. But, as what I was going to say, was that the return journey of human consciousness heading back up the tree is often depicted on the diagram as a coiling serpent, which, as you say, is indeed the Kundalini energy of it winding its way across all the paths on the tree. Because until we've experienced every possible sphere and every possible path, then we can't possibly re-achieve Godhead. But we do so by raising the Kundalini, raising the great serpent, who is actually also the Ouroboros, because time goes round in a funny little circle and happy days. Eternity exists.
It certainly does. Well, so that's really apples, isn't it? That's why we do that. But also, don't forget. But don't also. Oh, I know we covered that quite quickly. But also, don't forget they were quite an abundant fruit as well, so they could waste it quite easily. It wasn't such an issue, as it were, to play or do more frivolous games like the scrying, and the apple bobbing and stuff, because they had quite a lot of them. They were a surplus.
I'm just thinking, I'm guessing an apple tree must be quite a hardy thing that's not too sensitive to climate, because apples grow just about everywhere in the world, don't they?
Mate, seriously. Yeah, they're really abundant, aren't they? And they give off a lot of fruit.
Yeah, I like apples. I had an apple tree in the garden, my parents' garden, when I was a kid, and it fell over, and it was my favourite tree, and it had fallen over, and its roots had all come up, and it was lying there, and then it had somehow managed to stay with some roots in the ground, and it had grown. So although it was fallen, it then kind of turned a right angle and came back up again. And it magical moment. Telling you stories, I suppose. I'm not sure it's even interesting, but it is to me. It just made me think that when I embarked upon a course of trying to achieve astral projection, and one of the techniques was to pick a spot that you wanted to project to that was outside of the window, and that apple tree used to silhouette itself in the moonlight. And that was my tree, and that was where I tried to push my consciousness to get out of my body.
But isn't that... I think trees are very integral, aren't they, in general? I mean, when I moved into my house, it was really important that I planted a tree, like a sapling, in the garden. It was really, really important to me to have a tree, my own tree.
Well, they're pretty useful because they convert all that poisonous carbon dioxide back into oxygen.
Yeah.
And without it, chopping down a rainforest is basically like turning off this planet's life support system, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Which, of course, being human beings, there's always some kind of some dreadful person who's about to press that button, isn't there?
Do you know what, though? The hardest tree to grow from a sapling in your garden type area is actually an oak tree.
Really?
Yep. It'll grow beautiful in a forest amongst its other trees.
So why won't it grow in a garden?
No idea. Don't know. But it just won't take. It's almost like it needs that community to get that foundation in. I don't know why. Let's probably get a gardener on. They'll be able to tell me a really cool explanation as to why you can't. But yeah,
do you know, I love this show.
One of the hardest things.
I love this show, and I love coming on and speaking to you, because we get through these subjects, don't we? We've come from Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, the beginning of the world, and the concept to Gardener's Question Time.
It's very true. We do go around the houses, but that's what makes this show so different. Now let's talk about nuts.
Talk about what?
Nuts.
Nuts. All right, sorry, yeah, okay. You've got about growing saplings. Now we've achieved wood. Let's get to nuts.
Well, they nut trees, I suppose. There was a link there somewhere in my brain.
Yeah, well.
And again, it was something they would store and be very useful for health and back into day, as it were. So they'd be easily to store for food throughout the winter. So
they don't go off as long as you don't let them go mouldy. Then nuts generally won't go off, will they?
Exactly. So they were a good staple for the diet, old nuts. But nutshells, again, this is another love thing. Halloween and the love divination thing is quite prevalent, actually.
All right, well, think about that, because we're playing reverse psychology yet again, because this idea that in this cycle of life, death and rebirth that we're in, and a consciousness of that, obviously at the time of death, what's the antithesis to death and dying? It's birth and life and fertility, and the opposite of death is life, supposedly. I'm not sure that's, in an occult sense, that's really true, because they're one and the same thing. But that idea of being at that time of year when you're most likely to face death. Sure, you can depict death and the fears and the terrors and mock them, but you can also enhance positively with the life thing. So it's probably not surprising that love and joy and romance and you know, all of that stuff, and those memories of the spring just gone and the thoughts ahead to the end of winter and the spring to come, you know, if you can then bring those into your celebration, you've completed the cycle, really. You've completed the circuit.
This is it.
So maybe it's not surprising.
Right, so how you divine with nutshells is basically you pick a... Oh, my God, you're going to die at this one. You pick
You just know that my smutty mind is already...
It's already there. It's already there. You pick a nut that you quite like the look of.
Yeah, you don't want one that's all wrinkled and
No.
like that, do you? You want a nice smooth one, yeah.
You pick a good nut and you name it with the one you've got your eye on. Right? Like the man, you have or lady, you've got your eye on. And
Big
then...
Jim. Can you call it Big Jim?
If that's the person you've got your eye on, Ashley, then you go for it. And you place it by the open fire, because obviously you all had open fires back then. And then you look for the reaction of the nut. So if
I think I know how mine would react if I got it near an open fire.
So, for example, right, if it popped and flew off the hearth, yeah, that don't look good, right? That's not a good sign, everybody.
No,
so
I
if
think
you've got a popping nut,
half carry, the last thing on my mind would be love and romance after that. Yeah, a bit of surgery, perhaps. Yeah.
right. But yeah, that's not a good sign, everybody. If it pops and flies off the hearth, you ain't going to get what you want. But if it burns slow and steady, and you know it was like enjoying the flame, then that's a positive sign.
Absolutely. Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
So, you know, that's another way of divination. Now, mirror scrying was also very prevalent around Halloween. Again, culturally, we've seen this through media and films, and many, many cultures across the globe have scrying as a way of connecting in, isn't it? Now, mirror scrying seems to be the one that we tend to do at Halloween. And this is the Bloody Mary thing, isn't it?
I'm not familiar with where you're going with that. I was thinking it was a bit more esoteric, but go ahead.
Okay, so this is quite woo-woo, believe it or not. If you look into the mirror and you're supposed to say Bloody Mary a number of times, and she's supposed to appear to you in the mirror, and it links to several different Marys throughout history.
I don't know, Kerry. My experience of looking in the mirror usually encourages me to say bloody hell.
Yeah, same here, mate. I tell you, I'm going, oh my God, I thought I looked all right. This tradition again goes back to the 1700s, but yeah, it's crap, really. This one is really, you know, not really a thing. It's just a scare fest. We'll go with Scarefest on this one. But mirror scrying or scrying in general is a very useful tool. So you talk to me about scrying.
Right, okay. Well, I'm thinking about, as always, I've gone the other way. I'm thinking about the idea of mirrors, because I was thinking about this basic concept of depicting something and giving it agency. And, of course, as we know, lots of so-called primitive cultures, when they encountered the so-called civilized one, there's this big thing about not having a photograph taken because you're capturing someone's soul.
Yeah.
But that's the point. You're creating this depiction of someone. You know, so I'm thinking of it, I don't know, in an unrealistic fantasy, I'm thinking of Dr. Livingstone up the jungle encountering tribes that have never seen white people before, and they take photographs and they see the picture of themselves, and they're very frightened by this because it's captured their image and therefore captured their soul. So now think about what happens when you look into a mirror. Whose soul is captured in the mirror?
You're right.
So where are you looking? You're looking within yourself. You're looking into your own thing. And if you're divining things, you see, people get this idea about divination being some kind of secret clue to looking at what's going to happen. And it's not really. It's looking into you at your present circumstance. Because if you want to get really philosophical and really theoretical about these things, then there is only you and there is only now. So if you look into you now, you might be able to get a clue about where you're probably heading and what circumstances you're going to attract to you. I mean, you must have told every tarot client you've ever had the same thing. Yeah. This tarot card is not going to tell you what's going to happen. It's going to tell you where you're headed and what's likely to happen if you carry on the path that you're on.
Yeah.
It's about your outlook at the moment and where you're taking yourself.
Exactly.
So I see a tall, dark stranger who on Wednesday will be carrying a frog over his shoulder, and at 3:00 will give you the winning lottery ticket. This is total hogwash. This is not how divination works. And you must, you've done tarot readings for people quite a lot, haven't you? And you have to kind of knock that thinking out of them at the start, don't you?
Yeah, it's a possibility of what could happen, not what is definitely going to happen, because you still have free will and you can change it because you have choice.
Well, and then, of course, because in your moment of change, which is always now, your perspective has changed and your choice has changed. So
exactly.
Gaining the knowledge of what, just that influence that having a card or a scrying session or whatever else, whatever that tells you, your knowledge or your psychology is immediately altered by what you perceive. And because your perceptions are altered, then your actions will alter. Because you're now seeing the world through a different lens. You've now been given a different piece of information, and you now know something that you didn't know the moment before. So within that instant, it's changed. I was helping I don't want to call it a student. I was helping somebody who's studying witchcraft with me the other week, and we sat and we were talking about the particular lesson, which I can't remember exactly what it was. Well, I can, but I'm not talking about it. And I said, you're going to change. You're going to change. You're going to transform. By the time you get home, you're going to drive home. And in the course of your drive home, your attitude and the way that your brain has got round these things we've been talking about is going to change the way you think about this stuff forever. And every moment changes. Every instant, every new piece of information that comes in totally reconfigures entirely the sum of your store of knowledge to this date. And at that point in time, your knowledge is never ever going to be the same again. You imagine, I find there's a real magic in that thought that you're going to discover something that you'll never ever be here again at this place. You'll never ever be in this exact circumstance where what you've seen, what you know, what you're conscious of, what's happened to you, your memories are changing, because as you move into the next second, the memory store you're carrying with you is now one memory greater. Mm-hmm. And nothing's ever, ever, ever the same. And this constant, eternal process of change and cycle, however much you quantize it and break it down into split seconds, you're changing your outlook on the future, and you're changing your outlook on the past. And in fact, you are literally changing the future and changing the past all the time, because there is only the now and there is only you. Wow, gone to big philosophy.
Gosh, you went deep there.
Oof, sorry about that. Yeah, got carried away there. Let's go back to smutty stuff about apples and vaginas.
Yeah, let's go back to the smut. So witches are very, very prevalent in Halloween. It's the time where witches go abroad, flying on their broomsticks.
I bloody don't. I'm stuck here in the rain in Nottingham.
It's not very pleasant flying weather, is all I'm saying at the moment. It's too cold and wet for my liking. So why is Halloween so linked to witches?
Well, because, really, the witch, traditionally and historically, is seen as that person who has that ability to bridge the gap into the other world, to step across the liminal platform into the world of spirits. So really, a witch is like a shaman.
But we don't need one night of the year to do that. We can do that at any time.
What do you mean, we, paleface? I probably ought to explain. I've said that. That's a joke, isn't it? That's a joke that was actually told to me by a Lakota holy man, which makes it okay to tell a possible cultural misappropriation, potentially racist joke. But it's the punchline from the joke about the Lone Ranger and Tonto surrounded by 1,000 warband Indians. And the Lone Ranger says, "Looks like we're in trouble now, Tonto." And Tonto looks at him and says, "What do you mean, we, paleface?" So, or was it you? God knows where I was. My brain. I'm sorry, Kerry. You've caught me on a funny day because my brain's now take me off into a completely different place.
Which is Halloween.
There's a couple
we don't
of people,
need one night.
There's a couple of people in the world who know what I've spent some of my weekend doing, and you're not one of them actually. But I watch Dances with Wolves, and please don't cringe, anybody. But you can do, it's okay. But I get caught up in the passion of things like that, of movies. And Dances with Wolves, Costner didn't do half a bad job of telling a story there. And of course, there's loads and loads of good stuff, and there's loads of good Lakota language and things. So my brain is thinking about Indians at the moment. It's thinking about my friends in that community.
You're in the Native American community at the moment.
I am not Native America. Well, dear me, America didn't come along. These people were native of something long before America.
Okay,
I mean, it wasn't
enough.
America.
I'm being told. I'm being told off.
True. Well, actually, you'll find that Indian people, although they kind of tolerate the term Native American, they do prefer to be called Indians.
Oh, okay.
Or, if you want to get pompous about it, eternal residents of Turtle Island, but whatever you like. So, yeah, for some reason...
Back to witches.
Back to witches. Well, no, what I was trying to say was that in every culture, the outsider, the member of the community who has that connection with the spirit world, they are the ones who, by virtue of having those skills, those talents, those abilities to connect with the spirit world, they're the ones that you come to when the spirit world is upper in your consciousness, which, as we were saying earlier, is exactly what's going on at Halloween. At Halloween, we are thinking of the things that we can't see, of the invisible world of forces behind the world of form. So it would seem natural that you would connect that festival with the very members of our community who are capable of crossing that border and getting into it.
That's right. Now, I learned a very interesting fact about broomsticks the other week.
Oh, Lordy, please don't repeat that.
I did. I will
Which
do.
one?
I'm going to do again. Well, the flying on broomsticks thing was actually a salve that they used to make, which had hallucinogenic properties.
Right. Fly agaric mushroom, isn't it? Generally, sometimes. Yeah.
That's
anyway,
right.
Yeah.
And it was inserted in that way.
What you're trying to say is that if you coat the shaft of a broomstick with a substance and then grip it with, as witches are supposed to do, nakedly, and to sit astride it and fly, then it is one way of applying, of getting the substance into your bloodstream, isn't it?
That's right. Very well put, Ashley. Very well put.
If you take certain recreational pharmaceuticals, you can do it that way as well, and it's much more fun. Yeah.
But we are not condoning that behaviour at all in any way, shape or form, Ashley.
Of course we're not. Of course we're not.
Okay. Well, I got informed that it was actually because the salve was actually for period pains.
Okay. Well, as I said to you earlier, my high priestess in my branch of the craft, I would have very much liked her to. I think she's listening tonight. She's might be in the chat room. She said she was going to, but she would be able to tell you better than I on subjects like that. I'm afraid I have to just for once not be a smartass and hold my hands up and say I didn't know that fact. I do know quite a bit about witchcraft, but I didn't know that.
Well, as I say, somebody told me that the other day, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that myself. I knew it was a salve that they used with hallucinogenic properties, but I didn't know why. I just thought it's because they like to have fun, quite frankly. But,
I can neither confirm nor deny that witches like to have fun.
But I'd love to get her on. Leslie, her name isn't it?
It is, yes, and I think she'd be a wonderful guest on this show, and I think she would lend the proceedings a touch of dignity that I seem to have undermined and pulled the rug out from. And she's also about 1 billion times more knowledgeable than I am on many of these subjects.
Exactly. So we need to get her on, definitely, I feel. So anyway, what is it you're going to be doing for Halloween? Because it hits us on Wednesday, doesn't it?
It does indeed, yes. Well, actually, I've got a couple of quite close friends with whom I'm going to celebrate, and we're probably, the moon's still quite bright at the moment, and hopefully the weather will be all right to go out, and I'll probably just go out for a nighttime walk and have a bit of commune with nature for a bit, and then perhaps return home for perhaps a bit of dinner and a dance.
A bit of a feast.
Yes, a little dinner, a little dance, that sort of thing. Yeah,
that's what we're calling it, is it? A dance.
Well, everything's a dance, isn't it? Really, it's the whole dance of life. I mean, you just conjured up an image of a witch on a broomstick and flying around, and everything's got symbology and everything means something, and it's all there to be seen, and it depends how you want to look at it, But basically, we're back to these themes and narratives of human existence, which is dying, being born, and the bit in between. Birth, death, rebirth, and then it all goes round again, and everything is related to that story. So everything has got something to do with either death or birth. Well, and most symbology and folklore is if you hold those two things in your mind, birth, death, love, the symbology of nearly every story's got that in it. And nearly everything that you look at. So, you tell me where a broomstick has got any relation to fertility. Well.
Anyway, before we finish, I would just like to, because we've talked very much about the cyclical times of the birth, death and rebirth cycle, I would like to just talk to you about the Greek mythology story of this time, which is basically Zeus and Demeter had a daughter called Persephone. Now, Persephone fell in love with the Lord of the Underworld, Hades, and got stolen away, didn't she?
She did. So we've got another theme that's a narrative theme here, which we hear in lots of other stories and lots of other cultures. I mean, you better tell the rest of the story so we can get there. But yes, the idea of this feminine energy, this thing this being that's fertile and lithe and beautiful and young, going away forever to spend some time in the darkness of death. Could that just be a bit like the beautiful summer goddess of the earth in all of her glory and her prime in the summer, which goes and hides in the barrenness and darkness through the winter?
Well,
only to return again.
So she got stolen away by Hades and fell in love with him while she was down there in the underworld. But her mum, Demeter, was mourning. She just got the land to be barren. She wouldn't allow the fertility to happen. So Zeus
she got a temper. She had her tears.
She really did stab. Yeah, she did sort of stamp her feet a little bit, which I don't blame her. Her daughter been stolen away from her. And Zeus had to step in and sort of like become a bit of a, okay, guys, we've got to sort this out. And they came to an understanding that basically for 6 months of the year, her daughter would go and spend time. So Persephone would go and spend time with her mother, Demeter. So we go from that's the summer, and then when Persephone goes back to Hades, you go through this slow decline into winter, and then her awakening hope through the spring, looking forward to her daughter coming back.
Birth, death, and rebirth.
Which is the birth, death, and rebirth. And on that note, we're pretty much coming to the end of the show, Ashley.
You mean we've got through an hour with the? You've managed to put up with my nonsense for an hour again, and we I don't know. Is there anybody out there listening? I hope so.
I hope so too.
I'd like them to feed back. I haven't had access to the chat room throughout the show, but Kerry, it's always a joy to talk to you and to do so on air. I know people always contact me afterwards and say, "Oh, I didn't hear your show live, but I've heard it since." And God, that was a great conversation. And then they pick up on things, and it sparks other little tendrils and threads of coincidence and people talking to each other about stuff. And it's great. And I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you very much for having me.
No, you're very welcome. And I always love our conversations too, because you're a font of knowledge. You very much are. I love our conversations.
I've been called a lot of things, but I'm a font, am I? I like that. Wait till we get off air and I'll take you up on that.
We always end up talking for hours after the show as well, don't we? That's
we do trouble. Really. We should possibly just record, this tosh for those conversations for like 5 hours or something, and then you wouldn't have to get in the studio on a Sunday night. You could just play it out.
Yeah, maybe I should do that. Anyway, on that note, we hope you enjoyed the show and learned a little bit about the traditions and the folklore behind some of the traditions that we celebrate at Halloween and why we do these things. And maybe a little bit more, because we talked philosophy as well tonight. Don't forget, everybody, if you've missed any of our shows, you can catch up on our Parasearch Radio YouTube channel. Don't forget, go over there, click, like, share and subscribe. And on the Parasearch Radio Facebook group page tomorrow, I will be going live to give you a rundown of all the up-and-coming shows on Parasearch Radio. On that note, I'd like to bid you all a very farewell. Thank you once again, Ashley, for joining me tonight. It's been a pleasure.
It certainly has, Kerry. It's always a pleasure with you. Thank you again.
And on that note, I bid you all a very farewell.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.